Hi everyone. Do something a little bit different here. It's Sunday afternoon. I'm in Mexico. I've just finished watching, as some of you know, I'm a big Tottenham Hotspur fan. Just finished watching a good game. So I'm looking for something to do. My wife's out of the house, and I'm thinking, what can I do to make some maybe do some stuff for the podcast. And I was thinking, what if we do a little quiz? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get ChatGPT here to, I don't know, I'll ask it to ask me questions. I'm going to record it on this other screen. It should work on my computer. I'll start that recording now. And I'll see if I can sort of link these up to make a video where you can see what I'm looking at. But essentially I'm just going to ask it to ask me the hardest questions, and we'll see how we go. Let's get started. First of all, ChatGPT, please write me let's go 10 question format quiz about Cambodian history. Let's go modern Cambodian history. Make it as hard as you can. Please allow 2 minutes in between questions for me to answer, and then provide the next question. And we're off. Okay. Question 1. What year did Cambodia gain independence from France, and who was the key figure leading this effort? That's an easy one. Or is it? So we can either go 1953 or 1954 on this one. So ChatGPT, as everyone knows, is a bit not good. So either 1953 is when Sihanouk's march for independence happened, and that would be my shout for this one. It was technically before the Geneva Conference in 1954, however, which did sort of solidify that whole thing. So it could be 1953, could be 1954. Let's go with 1953. 1953, and who was the key figure leading that effort? Well, obviously Sihanouk, and King Sihanouk was the leading figure. Correct. Okay. Question 2. What was the name of the Cambodian political movement founded in the 1960s that later evolved into the Khmer Rouge, and what ideology did it originally promote? So these are obviously very easy, so we might have to, maybe we can boost the difficulty here somehow. What was the name of the Cambodian political movement founded in the 1960s that later evolved into the Khmer Rouge? That is an interesting one. I mean, to say it later evolved into the Khmer Rouge is interesting, because technically the Khmer Rouge was this term that Sihanouk was using kind of earlier than that, just to refer to any sort of educated Cambodians that were leaning to the communist cause that weren't sort of directly affiliated with the Vietnamese. Wasn't it a Cambodian political movement founded in the 1960s that later... Well, I guess we could technically say that it would have been the Communist Party of Cambodia, the CPK, and the ideology it promoted was communism. Yeah, okay. So hey, ChatGPT, hold on a second. Hey, ChatGPT, can you make these harder, please? What was the alias of Saloth Sâr? Question 3. What was the alias of Saloth Sâr during his early leadership of the Communist Party of Cambodia, and how did this name reflect his strategic approach to taking power? Alias during his early leadership. So, his early aliases, I mean, if we want to go back to France when he was studying in Paris, his earliest alias, I suppose, at that point was Khmer Rouge, which was actually sort of copied from the pages of Nagara Vata, the Cambodian sort of newspaper, this nationalist newspaper. A lot of people would sort of write into the editor, and they would use these pseudonyms like Son of the Khmers or Original Khmer, which is Khmer Rouge, which is what he penned this essay, which attacked Sihanouk in 1952. He wrote that under that for this sort of Parisian student newsletter. So what was the alias during his early leadership of the Communist Party of Cambodia? So that would have to be 1962 and onwards. About time he was using the name Pol, but not Pol Pot. Yeah, that actually happened quite a bit later in sort of the late 60s. So it's an interesting question. And it may be because ChatGPT is a bit weird. During his early leadership of the Communist Party of Cambodia, and how did it reflect his strategic approach to gaining power? I'm wondering if it wants me to say brother number one, even though this was another thing that was kind of borrowed from the Vietnamese and didn't, like, if you talk to some of the, well, some of the leaders have said, like Nguyen Chair, they didn't really emphasize the brother number one thing too much either. Hey, tough question. Let's see if we can fool ChatGPT here. So his early leadership of the Communist Party of Cambodia, let's say Pol. Wasn't Pol Pot yet, was not Pol Pot yet. That name was taken up later. How did this reflect his approach? I would say that this naming convention emphasized the secretive keeping himself and others in the shadows to avoid detection by Sihanouk's police. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say about that. Excellent analysis, it said. Sâr did indeed adapt the alias Pol, later Pol Pot, to maintain secrecy. So you can never kind of tell with these either. It's like, am I telling it the answer and it's going like, oh, that is a good answer? Or like, will it tell me if I'm wrong? I don't know. It was a crap question, but let's go to question 4. During the Khmer Rouge Democratic Cambodia regime, a series of purges targeted even high-ranking officials within the movement. What was the name of the infamous detention and torture center in Phnom Penh, and who was its notorious chief? So, guys, I've asked ChatGPT to be the hardest questions, and I think I could have been answering a lot of these when I was about 15. So, what does this bode for the future of AI? Or is there a sort of deeper analysis there where AI doesn't really have much to go on, because I guess it's just using what is already sort of out there, and if it's basically just reading Wikipedia or stuff like that, I imagine a lot of the sources it has are not just sort of available for it to quickly read. So let's quickly do this one. The infamous detention and torture center. That is, at least, I'll give it that. That is a good sort of descriptor, it's kind of hard to call S21 a prison per se, because it really was. It's not like people were there to be imprisoned for doing something wrong. They really were taken there to be interrogated, to be subjected to this horrible torture and treatment, in order to facilitate, the regime's need to root out enemies. So, if you think of a normal prisoner, someone who does something wrong and goes to prison and gets let out, that's not at all what S21 was about. S21 was really at the apex of a security network, looking to root out enemies of the regime, less so to imprison and punish people for doing anything wrong. It was more a function of the government itself. So, infamous detention torture center was called S21 or Center Bar 21, which sort of meant like Security Office 21. The former high school at Sling, and its notorious chief, commandant was King Gik Yuv. Otherwise known as Doik. Question 5. The Khmer Rouge's agricultural policies were heavily influenced by Maoist models but were uniquely extreme. What specific term describes the forced evacuation of cities and the focus on collective agrarian labor, and how this aligned with the regime's ideological goals? Heavily influenced by Maoist models but extreme. But what specific term describes the forced evacuation of cities and the focus on collective agrarian labor? And how did this align with the regime's goal? The specific term that they're looking for. This one sort of takes me back. This is I remember writing about this literally in high school, and I think in some of my early university essays when I was like 18. I think it wants me to say, which is again what, it's just searching out there for things to grab onto, but I think it wants me to say radical agrarian Marxism. Unless it wants, because what specific term described the forced evacuation of cities and the collective agrarian labor? The other way it could be going there is to go for the super great leap forward phrase, which is what I like if I'm trying to use some shortcuts to explain things to people. That is very helpful to say, look, you saw what happened with the Great Leap Forward in China in the 50s. Imagine someone taking that without knowing how bad it was and saying, what if we did that better and more extreme? And they literally described it themselves as the super Great Leap Forward. Depending on the translation there. So I think that's probably what they want from here. So the super great leap forward. But let's see if I'm telling ChatGPT what the answer is, and it'll say, that's a great answer, rather than what it actually had to say. But was the term that the CPK used to self-describe. This is crazy. I was listening to a podcast the other day when they were talking about you can type a lot. As soon as you've got someone watching, or if you've got to do it in front of a presentation or whatever like this, just typing it immediately becomes quite difficult. The term that the CPK used to self-describe their revolution including the need to evacuate the cities and collectivize the agricultural economy. This aligned with their goals of self-mastery. Autarky is the proper word for that one. But they always self-refer to as self-mastery. We're going to be the masters of our own sort of country here. Self-mastery and creating a pure revolution based on the peasantry and a communist vanguard. But it says, great analysis, yeah, outstanding response. Indeed framed the radical agrarian. I wonder what it would have said if I said radical agrarian Marxism. Which is, I remember reading that in like one of those sort of textbook kind of responses a long time ago, but I don't really think it makes radical agrarian Marxism. I mean, kind of. Okay. Question 6. In what year did the Vietnamese forces invade Cambodia, leading to the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime, and what was the name of the Cambodian government established under Vietnamese control? So, Vietnam invaded at the end of 1978, Christmas Day, and it took them like 2 weeks. Very quick sort of blitzkrieg kind of thing. It's interesting. What I'm looking at the podcast at the moment is 1970 and this first year of the Cambodian Civil War. And one of the astounding things, which I'd sort of forgotten, was like we dealt with in the end of season 2, where there's the coup against Sihanouk and he makes his appeal. Within 2 weeks, you've got North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, NLF armies just almost at Phnom Penh. Like a blitzkrieg kind of thing, just completely taken control of, almost, as well as parts of the north and northwest, like around Siem Reap. Just immediately, like these sort of lightning attacks. And they're shocked, and like the Lon Nol government is like, oh, okay, didn't see that one coming, which again is sort of part of their naivety about what they were expecting. But it also shows just how prepared the Vietnamese armies, the communist Vietnamese armies, were to say, no, you cannot get rid of the sanctuaries we were using in Cambodia to facilitate our war against the South. Any threat to that, not going to happen. So they basically seek to neutralize that almost immediately. And I mean, the parallel there is kind of interesting, that in almost 10 years later, in 1978, the Pol Pot regime is so clueless and unprepared, yet still quite sort of full of bluster, that they're willing to sort of engage in this war that they have no chance of winning. And as soon as the Vietnamese provide this concerted effort to invade, it's over almost immediately. And that's what happened here. So, leading to fall of what was the name of the Cambodian government established under Vietnamese control? That was the People's Republic of Cambodia, PRK. Question 7. The Paris Peace Agreements of 1991 marked a significant step toward ending decades of conflict in Cambodia. What unique feature of the agreements distinguished them in international diplomacy, particularly regarding the role of the United Nations? I guess this is basically just wanting something about the UNTAC period that it's sort of, and this is stretching me because this is a part of the history that I haven't looked at since I did, in Australia you can do what's called an undergrad thesis, so you finish your bachelor's, and they basically say, hey, do you want to do an extra year, and you do like an extra bit. So you do 2 more units of study, and you also write a thesis, which is like 20,000 words. And that was when I first met David Chandler, and he basically sat down with me one day and was like, hey, what's going on? What are your ideas for this? And I was like, something about genocide and this and that, because I still back then probably, I would say I had a pretty basic understanding of everything going on. I think I wanted to do something about like the question of like the definition of genocide, which I still think would have been a good one. But he, in his wisdom, which I don't think is the improper word to use there, he said, look, what are you doing? You're doing an international studies degree. You know what you should do? You should do a thesis about Australia's involvement in the Paris, the Paris Peace Agreements to facilitate the peace period in Cambodia, because at the time we had I forget his name now, Evans. Greg Evans, maybe? Gareth Evans, I think. And he was promoting this idea of the responsibility to protect in international relations, which is, I think, still a really powerful concept. It's basically this idea of, can we not do... Basically, like if you look at something like the genocide in Rwanda or a number of other instances where you just say, look, there's basically a population of people that are in dire need of protection from some kind of outside community because they're being attacked by their own government, let's say, in the case of Rwanda or something similar. Then there is a responsibility to protect doctrine that should be sort of imparted into the international community to provide a military, if need be, protection for any kind of at-risk population. And it really would be great if that was sort of the direction that things moved in, rather than these half-assed, like, we have to wait until it meets a certain criteria, or is this really genocide or is it not really genocide? Who's to know? Let's not do anything. Or is this really just to protect our own national interests and whatever other things come under that? Like humanitarian interventions are so rare and so rarely done under like the actual guise of a humanitarian intervention. So his idea was somewhat sort of similar, but he was quite heavily involved in the Paris Peace Agreements, and Chandler sort of just set me to go on that. He was like, yeah, you should probably just email him and see if you can get an interview with him. And me, I think I was 20, and I was just like, okay, didn't know you could do that, didn't know you could just email people and talk to them, and which I did, and he responded, and was about to set it up. But halfway through that process, I decided to leave university. I didn't go back for about 6 or 7 years, and then I went back and finished that thesis. But I did a completely different thing. I compared what was going on in Myanmar with the Rohingya, sort of this Muslim community up in the sort of northwest of Burma or Myanmar. Sort of compared this, like, Myanmar's a sort of Buddhist country and a sort of very integral to the government there, and in a way that, I mean, is sort of common in Southeast Asia, but this was almost like a nationalistic Buddhism that they were really focused on. And I thought, oh, okay, so you've got this essentially Buddhist government that is perpetrating a genocide against a Muslim ethnic minority, and I thought that's perhaps that can be compared and contrasted to the democratic Kampuchea regime and what they did against the Cham Muslim minority during their time in power. And there were some difficulties there, but I think it was a good thesis. By that time, Chandler had sort of fully retired. He was already like a professor emeritus at back in like 2011 or 12 when I was talking to him then. But in 2018, he'd sort of fully retired. But that's when at the end of that process, I got in contact with him for that interview to sort of reconnect and talk to him. So yeah, that brings me back to what I was talking about. So yeah, some of that stuff is a little bit distant from what I've been studying recently, but what have we got here? Paris Peace Agreements marked a significant step toward ending decades of conflict. Unique features of the agreements, international diplomacy. Okay, so this is in regard to the UNTAC period. Essentially, the UN was given kind of like an interim. They would just like, we're going to take control of the country for like a small amount of time. Everyone put your gun, like we're going to keep everyone's guns and we're going to organize a transfer of power. Not even really, you could say transfer of power. So essentially it was given a remit to control Cambodia, to disarm all the belligerent parties, and to facilitate a democratic election, which didn't go down very well. Well, it did, and then it didn't. And the Khmer Rouge were one of the first people who were like, nah, we want our guns back. We're going to keep being disruptive. What do I say here? Exactly right. Hey, good on me. Okay, question 8. In the 1980s, the Khmer Rouge operated as a guerrilla force along the Thai-Cambodian border. What was the name of the coalition government they formed to gain international legitimacy, and which major powers provided them with covert support during this period? Is that Funsenpec? It's all these acronyms. Same thing with the podcast at the moment. You've got the GRUNC, which is the National Front that Sihanouk sends up, and then you've got, because I'm looking at like a lot of the military stuff here, you've got every book, because they treat it very seriously, particularly if they're more sort of like a military history book, they use the like proper acronyms for everything. So a country, they won't say like a country's army, they'll say, no, what was the name of that country's army, and they usually have a very specific name. In the early 1970s, it's like, you've got FANK, which is the army of the Cambodian government. So you've got FANK up against GRUNC, which is the National Front that Sihanouk set up, and then you've got the PAVN, PAVN, which I believe is the North Vietnamese army, and then you've got like all these different acronyms, which can be sort of annoying. I'm thinking of writing sort of like a shorthand, so the listeners can be just given a bit of a brief thing. But weirdly, I get why it does matter as well, because there are these different armies really are run by different countries and different interests, and it doesn't really make sense to say, the communist invasion of Cambodia in 1970, because what are you talking about? You're talking about North Vietnamese armies, the Viet Cong armies, which are separate but under the same umbrella, but they are separate. And then you'll have South Vietnamese, like the South Vietnamese government propped up by the US. You'll have them fighting. You'll, for a brief time, also have American forces fighting, and you will have the government of Cambodia fighting, and you'll have the Khmer Rouge fighting as well. So it does make sense to use all these things, but I'm trying to tease out a way to make it a bit easy to talk about. And in the 90s, this became even worse, because you've got all these different factions that are sort of going for power, these Cambodian factions. Apologies for burping so much, but I am having a beer. So in the 1980s, the Khmer Rouge operated as a guerrilla force. Yeah. Coalition government. I can't get Phnom Penh out of my mind. I think this is the first one I'm going to get wrong, because I think Phnom Penh might have been a different part of this, but essentially it was like a coalition, again, another national front, where the Khmer Rouge sort of had to, they provided the bulk of what this insurgency was, but they essentially had to take a step back and say, no, look, we've got people like Sihanouk, and we've got people like other sort of nationalist people out here. We've got some royalist factions. So under this different banner, and I'm realizing this more and more, that a lot of these conflicts come down to like optics and branding. So you want to brand your sort of insurgency in the right way, and the Khmer Rouge had a very bad sort of reputation by that point. So I want to say Phnom Penh. You could not get me to tell you what that acronym was for, but I think it was essentially like the royalist, nationalist coalition to retake Cambodia from the Vietnamese. And who supported them? Well, that was mostly Thailand, China, and the USA. And this is like another little point, is because this always comes up in certain parts of the internet. Like, people say, "Oh, Khmer Rouge, so bad, genocide, 2 million dead," and then someone will chime in and say, "Yeah, but did you know that the USA supported the Khmer Rouge?" And, you know, it's fine. Like, this is how people generally talk about history. They try and boil things down. And it's not incorrect. It does have to do a lot about timing, obviously. But yes, the USA did support this coalition to go against the Vietnamese-backed PRK regime. Now, a lot of different reasons for that. I mean, the obvious being that they were trying to limit Soviet influence. The Vietnamese, obviously part of the Soviet sphere, as opposed to the Chinese. And through sort of the Nixon administration, their biggest strategy to sort of balance the world order was to sort of reestablish ties with communist China as a means to sort of keep opening up that Sino-Soviet split that had occurred for the last 30 years or so by that point. So supporting the national front that wished to, I always use the phrase like, provide a thorn in the side. It's basically this little annoyance to the Vietnamese-backed regime. It's going to keep draining them of resources. They're going to have to keep fighting this war. So yes, the USA with China did support the Khmer Rouge as part of this broader umbrella. The USA, they're providing financial support mostly. China was the one supporting this group militarily, and Thailand as part of this. My understanding of that is that they wanted to limit the influence of their own sort of leftist, communist sort of insurgency that apparently had been sort of keeping them on their toes for some time. So as a deal, it basically China said, okay, well, we'll make sure your communists don't do anything as long as you support the Khmer Rouge on the border. And the Americans sort of facilitated that process as well, as well as the British. But usually that is sort of repackaged as, did you know the USA supported the Khmer Rouge? It's like, kinda, yeah. Okay. Let's get an answer here. Close. Oh no, I got one wrong. The coalition was the CGD. Aha, so there was a higher coalition, and Phun Sin Pek was one of. Okay. Hands up. Got one wrong. Got half of it right though, with the supporters. But yeah, the amount of acronyms that come out of this whole history are. Anyway. Okay, question 9. Hun Sen has been a dominant figure in Cambodian politics since the 1980s. Before his defection to Vietnam and rise to power, what was his role within the Khmer Rouge, and what factors led to his break with the regime? Look, his role is shrouded in mystery, I guess you could say, and I'd probably say, well, there's good reasons that's the case. He himself has given different accounts over the years, and you'll notice even within the sources, like some of the big secondary sources, there are different accounts of Hun Sen's involvement. Like sometimes, I think, I'm stretching my memory here, but I think one source he said, once the Samlaut rebellion occurred, or maybe even earlier than that, there was some kind of maybe like some kind of Sihanouk repression where he was in maybe Kampong Cham, and he thought, no, this is too much, I'm gonna join. But he wouldn't say it was like, oh, I'm gonna join the Khmer Rouge. He said, I'm just gonna join the resistance against the government's bad, and I'm gonna join that. And there are different accounts of like when exactly that was, but yes, okay, so I guess the other point of that is him being like constantly needing to sort of distance himself from the worst aspects of the Khmer Rouge, obviously. So, before his defection to Vietnam and rise to power, what was his role within the Khmer Rouge, and what factors led to his break within the regime? As far as I know, he was a fairly middling level cadre in the southeast, the east, and he feared for his own life essentially after seeing the purges. Let's go with that. Probably the purges of Sao Pim. His role. Cadre in the southeast or eastern zone when the purges of these areas were occurring. Hun Sen defected to the Vietnamese. And yeah, like I said, this is controversial. Like, some people have tried to include him in specific instances of crimes, and there's sort of, if I'm not wrong, sort of a counter argument to that always, where it's like, no, in fact he was really disgusted by the crimes he was seeing, so he went. But I think a middle answer is essentially, he was a mid-level cadre, and he was scared for his own life, probably because he knew how the regime was operating, which was very much, at that point, like, if you were connected to someone who was being purged, you were next in line. And whether that was because you'd done anything wrong or not, but more, as we said before with the S21 stuff, just because you would get sent to S21, they would torture you for days, weeks, months, and by the end of that torture, you would have named your family, your extended family, everyone you've known, everyone you went to school with, everyone that you've met, everyone that you were connected with in the party. Because it's people often forget that. I think it's easily like 2/3 of the people that did go through S21 were Khmer Rouge. This is, it's the top prison. This is where you send your top people that are most suspected, that you want to get the best information out of. Not to say that a lot of non-party members or non-affiliated people went there, but people, you walk through S21 Tuol Sleng and you see all these pictures, and most of those people are there because they're party affiliates or family members or associated in some way with the party itself. That's why you get these biographies that are very telling sometimes. And anyway, continue. When the purges, okay. Let's see how we go with that. Absolutely correct. Yes. Question 10. The extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia were established to prosecute Khmer Rouge leaders, despite years of challenges, namely these two major criticisms of the ECC and their implications for justice in Cambodia. I've got Siri. I've said ECCC, so Siri has started talking in my ear. Please stop. Okay, so two criticisms of the ECCC. It went on too long. By the time it was over, most of the accused had died, which is crap. It really sucks that was the case. Another is that it focused on the top leaders rather than many who were just as responsible for the vast amounts of murder and suffering. You've got a lot of people just living in the same communities. It's like, that guy was the Khmer Rouge chief of the village, and now he's just living his life, and people kind of just have to deal with that. And that's part of this really wider problem of justice. Not to paraphrase, read the Justice Facade for a full breakdown, but the same thing happened in Rwanda, where there is sort of an impossibility to put just everyone in jail who did everything wrong, and you kind of have to find a different method of finding justice and reconciliation. In Rwanda, they went for this. It's been a while since I've talked about this, but gacaca trials, I think was the case. It was essentially like a community trial where people would be put through their guilt and accountability in front of the rest of the community, and the community would get to voice how they were. It feels bad to say wronged when we're talking about mass murder, but essentially that was it. And then people would have to listen to that. The accused would have to listen to that and say, okay, and they would have to sort of show their remorse, and then that was supposed to be enough to sort of say, okay, can this community get over this? Because you've got a nation full of perpetrators. In Cambodia, you have a similar thing where you've got a nation full of, the entire nation was subjected to this. So everyone's got a story, but there are a lot of people that were perpetrating these crimes in whatever way. And if you think about how much a murder of a single individual impacts a society in a modern Western liberal democracy or whatever, you say, wow, someone was murdered, stop everything. focus on that, get that person to trial and to jail. And when you've got a whole country where that could have occurred, well, let's say out of the 2.5 million people who died, let's roughly say that 1 million people within that number were murdered by the state, as opposed to dying from overwork, starvation, or disease. So you've got more than 1 million deaths, more than 1 million murders, I should say. How do you prosecute that? So you prosecute the people at the top who created the ideology and the circumstances and the functions of government that created that. And that's what the courts went for. They went for what was called almost like a similar criminal enterprise, a joint criminal enterprise. So you can, without saying that Ieng Sari or Pol Pot directly killed someone with their own hands, you can say, well, they set up a criminal enterprise which perpetrated these murders. But you're leaving the murderers free. And that's something that the community has to just deal with. And it's very tough. And you can imagine all of the different ways that sort of presents itself. It's horrible. And it's just sort of like a fact of how that country has to exist. And that's why the tribunals, I mean, apart from, I think the biggest criticism is how long it took, because they're so old and half of them died on trial, and Pol Pot died and Tarmok died, and you didn't get to have this in a timely fashion. And there's a lot of blame to be placed all across the board for that, but not all of it is just on, the UN and the USA, but the Cambodian government itself under Hun Sen, which had to tread this line between keeping themselves in power and keeping themselves in a way that was on top of things, as well as integrating these previously powerful elements of the Khmer Rouge back into their frame. So very difficult, very controversial. I would say the really good book on this is Craig Etchison's history on the tribunals, which I'm pretty sure is called Extraordinary Justice. Really does a good job of just showing, Siri, don't even stop it. So yeah, that's the great resource there. But the two major criticisms, certainly, it went on for too long, it cost too much money. I think it was set up in 2007. They didn't get the final 2 liters until 2018. So it's like 11 years. And I think it was in the early 2000s that these things were getting talked about as well. So that one, and that it focused on the top leaders. I think that's what we're going to go for. And that's question 10. What do we get? Precisely 2 major, yeah. So a lot of ways it is just going to agree with me. Oh, it does give some extra context here. It's good. But I did get one wrong, didn't I? So it wasn't all good. I got that one acronym wrong. 9 out of 10. That was a fun way to spend. Man, I spent 52 minutes. Okay, great. If you watched this, fantastic. I hope you had a great weekend. I am working on the latest episode as we speak. Things are shaping up well. All right, I'll see you later, guys. Have a good one.